Jets fans are hoping Aaron Glenn will be the NFL's next great head coach, and it's never too early for him to show how he's going to make that happen. Locked On Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, July 31st, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen, our first watch every day. A big shout out to you every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we are focusing on the first week of New York Jets training camp. We're going to talk about one of the Jets' best players, giving some insightful scouting reports on two critical players who need to step up for the Jets in 2025. We're going to talk about this team's youth movement. It's impacting the Jets across the board, and it could have a big impact at one position in particular. But I'm going to begin by talking about the job head coach Aaron Glenn has done through this first week of practices. When training camp began last week, one of the things that I said was it's best to avoid the day-to-day who's up, who's down, because a player may have a great practice today and have a lousy practice tomorrow. So you don't really learn that much by who won practice on a given day. And also, who's playing well in practice is kind of subjective. Sometimes what you'll see is one reporter will say this guy did great, and another reporter will say the same guy did poorly today. So difficult to read too much in the day-to-day. I think what you have to do is you have to look for themes that are consistent through the entirety of training camp. And for the New York Jets, there have been a couple of themes that have come through over the last week. And top among them, I think, has been just the intensity of this training camp practice. There were reports the other day, the Jets actually did a live tackling drill. You usually don't see that sort of physicality in training camp in the NFL these days. And this got me thinking a little bit. You know, good head coaches really come in all shapes and sizes in this league. And the things coaches bring to the table are different across the board. You have your guys like Andy Reid, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, the offensive masterminds, the guys who understand how to run an offense, who understand how to get the most out of their offensive players. But these aren't the only types of head coaches who succeed. There's also John Harbaugh, who's as good as anybody at relating to his players and always stays at the cutting edge of the most modern NFL strategies to implement during games. Aaron Glenn's mentor, Bill Parcells, of course, has been retired for quite a while, but Parcells was just the master motivator. Other than Vince Lombardi, Parcells was probably the best coach ever at figuring out how to motivate his players to succeed. I mean, there were guys who played way better under Parcells than they played at any other point in their careers. Parcells was not, Parcells knew X's and O's, but he was not a strategist. He was a motivator. We could talk about Bill Belichick. What were the things that made Bill Belichick so great in New England? Well, he was probably the best there was at finding little advantages for his team. Super Bowl 36, when the Patriots upset the mighty St. Louis Rams, their only offensive touchdown in that game came on a Tom Brady pass to Troy Brown. And Belichick actually adjusted the play in the playbook for that game because what he found was the Rams had a corner who bid on up and outs. So the play, the original play was that Brown was, and this was the play that was in the Patriots playbook, Brown was just going to run an out route and kind of take himself to the sidelines. But the night before that game, Belichick changed the route and had Brown break out and then break to the corner of the end zone because he knew the Rams corner was susceptible to biting on things like that. Just a little tweak of the play. You talk Super Bowl 49. That was the famous Malcolm Butler play where the Seahawks inexplicably threw the ball on the 1 yard line. There were a couple of aspects that made Belichick stand out on that play. First of all, is the play before the Butler interception, the Seahawks ran the ball to the 1 yard line with Marshawn Lynch, and the clock kept running. And everybody thought that the Patriots would call a timeout because they wanted to preserve time for a potential drive after Seattle scored. But Belichick sensed that there was indecision on the Seattle sideline. So he said he didn't want to give him a timeout to talk things over. The next play, Seattle made the inexplicable play call. Butler intercepted the pass and New England won the Super Bowl. Painful memory for Jets fans. But another aspect that stood out with Belichick on that play was the Patriots actually changed their goal line defense that season. Across the league in 2014, you started to see the rise of 3 wide receiver sets on the goal line in the NFL. It became a challenge for defense because your typical goal line defense is a 6-2-3, 6 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 3 defensive backs. So you're going up against 3 wide receivers. And the challenge was that of the 3 defensive backs, usually you had 2 corners and 1 safety. So even 3 wide receivers against 2 corners and 1 safety, you're in trouble. What Belichick changed his defense. He went 6-2-3, but the 3 defensive backs were all corners. And that small tweak made a big difference in that game. And you heard stories like, I don't want to praise Belichick too much on this show. It's a Jets show. But Belichick found like those little strategic things that just made his team a little bit better. And that's very much like a microcosm of what good coaching does in the NFL. A good coach is not going to take, C talent and turn it into a Super Bowl team. What a good head coach does is he turns C talent and gets B talent results out of it. Takes B talent, gets A talent results out of it. Takes A talent, gets A plus talent results out of it. It just makes everybody a little bit better, puts guys in positions to succeed. And look, Aaron Glenn hasn't coached a game yet. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Aaron Glenn is on the caliber of any of those guys before he coached a game. But one of the things I'm looking for in this first training camp are just like little signs that maybe Glenn has something special in him. Because look, I'm a Jets fan, first of all. I want Glenn to succeed. But Glenn has really resonated with me just from his public appearances. And I think part of it's, I loved Aaron Glenn when he was a player. He was with the Jets in the 90s and the early 2000s. So this is one of our guys. We want to see him succeed. And the way this training camp is going kind of like raises my hope level a little bit. Now, I'm not calling him Reed yet. I'm not calling him Harbaugh yet. I'm certainly not calling him Parcells or Belichick yet. The reason I was talking about those guys is not necessarily because I think Aaron Glenn is on their level at this point in time, or that he'll necessarily ever reach the Hall of Fame level as a coach. But I wanted to show that each coach has a different way of making his team better. And for Glenn, I'm watching this training camp play itself out. And I like the fact that he's, having such a tough training camp. Now, Parcells was famous for having tough training camps because, he wanted to toughen his players up. For me, it's not so much about that. I mean, I know there are like some old school football fans who love a tougher training camp. But for me, it's not really about toughness. It's just, I can't count how many times over the last 10, 15 years in the NFL that the play has been really sloppy and league-wide the first week or two of the season. And I think a lot of this goes back to players aren't really getting ready for the season in training camp and in the preseason games. And, some of this may go back to, the fact that they have mandated that training camp practices are easier. But I think part of it's also that teams don't take advantage of those exhibition games. You barely see the starters play anymore. So, I mean, how many times do you see a sloppy route run? How many times do you see a guy not focus and drop a ball the first couple of weeks of the season? How many times do you get to the fourth quarter of a game and a guy's exhausted? It happens an awful lot. And I think that a team that runs a training camp practice that's a little tougher, maybe that's an edge. Maybe it's a sign Glenn's onto something. Now, a year ago, Robert Saleh compared his training camp to the Junction Boys, which was a famous college football training camp when the legendary coach Bear Bryant first took over at Texas A&M. And, if you were around 23 years or so ago, ESPN actually made an original movie about that. It was a brutal training camp. I mean, it was the type of stuff no coach would ever be allowed to do today. But Bryant wanted to, see which of his guys were really dedicated. So a year ago, Saleh was talking himself up about what a tough training camp he was running. The difference is this year, it does feel like all of the talk about how tough Glenn's training camp has been generated from the media who've just been observing it. Aaron Glenn's not telling you how tough his training camp is. The media is reporting it. And this is the type of thing, as we just look for these little bits of information. And we're not going to have a good idea on how good of a coach Aaron Glenn is for a long time. At least 2 years, we won't know whether or not he's actually a good coach. But this is just one of those little pieces of information that I'm going to tuck in the back of my head. And if it works out for Aaron Glenn, this might be the first sign that, he's looking to get an edge. He's looking to help the Jets prepare for a season at a higher level than other teams. Now, how well will it work? If the Jets go out and get blown out week 1, week 2, we won't really care about any of this. But training camp, as much as anything, is kind of about setting the table for the season. And we're going to look back, once we get to week 6, week 7, and we'll remember things about training camp. We'll remember things about how the Jets prepare for the season. And I wonder maybe when we're at that point of the year, whether we might be a little happy that Glenn has run such a tough training camp. And if he has, maybe it's the first sign that we actually hired a good head coach for once. Well, we can all dream. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there's something about the Jets are doing to build their team that I really like. There has been a huge shift between last year and this year when we talk about the age of the team. That has many benefits. It could have benefit at one position in particular, which we'll talk about as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink minus the alcohol into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5energy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with your friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-hour energy shots today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Earlier this week, the New York Jets did something uncharacteristic, or at least something that's been uncharacteristic this offseason. They signed an old player, and it was Nick Folk, the veteran kicker, who comes in, and I presume he's going to win the kicking job. I guess it's still technically an open competition for kicker, but Nick Folk's been one of the best kickers in the NFL the last few years. But being old at kicker is really not that big of a deal. Guys kick effectively into their 40s. Across the rest of the roster, though, there has been quite a youth movement. In fact, there are very few Jets players over 30 this year. You look across this roster, you've got Tyrod Taylor, you've got Josh Reynolds, you've got Alan Lazard, now you've got Folk, you have the long snapper Thomas Hennessy. Again, that's not a position where I'm not that worried about having an older player. It's a huge contrast with last year. Of course, last year the Jets had Aaron Rodgers, the oldest quarterback in the NFL, but you actually look across the team last year, and it depends on how you want to judge a starting player. When did Hassan Reddick become a starter? How do you deal with Mike Williams and Devontae Adams? But at any given point last year, around 40% of the Jets starting lineup was either 29 years or older. And that doesn't even go into the guys who were kind of like core backups who were pretty old. Guys like not Chuck Clark. Guys like Jalen Mills, Wes Schweitzer. And the Jets had an inordinate number of older starters last year. And, look, it hurt them. Aaron Rodgers was in decline. Tyron Smith was in decline. Jets had a number of older players who just did not deliver. Mike Williams' issue may not have been that he was turning 30. It may have been more of a knee injury type thing, but I would imagine his age probably played some role in his struggles to recover and regain his athleticism. And Williams, of course, has retired this year during training camp. Now, look, in the NFL, it's usually better to be younger than older. Of course, there are some guys who can play well into their 30s. There's always, I'm not saying that you never sign a player over 30, but generally speaking, you want your team to have youth, because guys who are older, guys who are 29, 30 and older, they're typically declining. You want to get players during the prime years of their careers. But I think there's another factor, and it goes into all the older backups the Jets had last year. You want to have younger backups for one very specific reason, is that your team only has so many reps on the practice field, and younger guys who are still ascending have an opportunity to use those practice reps and develop into something more. Today's backup could be tomorrow's starter. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Jamien Sherwood. Jamien Sherwood was a backup for years. He worked on the practice field with the Jets, and he used those practice reps to improve. And eventually he turned into a starting level player. And when I don't want to pick on Jalen Mills. I know Woody Johnson loves Jalen Mills. Woody Johnson last year ordered Jeff Ulbrich to bench Tony Adams to put Jalen Mills into the starting lineup. But he just had too many older backups. And while that wasn't the most important issue with the team, it's one of those things that you start to feel a couple of years down the line when you haven't developed as many late round picks and UDFAs into quality starters. But there's one position in particular where I think it really does pay to have a youth movement, and that's the running back position. Now, to be fair, last year the Jets finally started to get young at running back. They drafted Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis and added them to a backfield with Breece Hall. And for the Jets, this was a good step towards fixing what's been a chronic issue with this team. The Jets have been, and this predates any GM you want to talk about, predates head coaches. It's been a chronic issue with this team for the longest time. The Jets love throwing money at big name running backs on the downside of their careers. They did it with Frank. I guess Frank Gore didn't make a ton of money, but they made Frank Gore the focal point of the offense in 2020 with Adam Gase. They did it in 2019 with Le'Veon Bell. A couple of years before that, they did it with Matt Forte. They did it with Chris Johnson in 2014. They did it with LaDainian Tomlinson in 2010. LT got off to a good start to his Jets career. I know I'm going to get some pushback for throwing LaDainian Tomlinson into that list, but if you look past LT's first month with the Jets, it really wasn't that spectacular. He had a great first month where he looked like the prime LT from the Chargers, but after that, he really wasn't that great. And the most recent example of this was 2023, where the Jets signed Dalvin Cook, which that happened about 2 years ago. I thought Dalvin Cook would be really good, so shows that I should learn as much as the Jets should learn that you go with the youth movement at the running back position. Now, Aaron Glenn, I think, maybe gave something away when he spoke earlier this week about how he was going to use his running backs. Glenn said, I told Breece Hall that receiving will be an element of his game that we're going to try to make sure that we utilize. And Braylon Allen, a 240-pound back that's always falling forward, that's where he's going to make his money. Just being able to downhill run, that's going to weigh on defensive players. And when you continue to do that, you create something as far as a team, as far as an identity that this league will take notice of. So I think Aaron Glenn actually kind of and sometimes you have to listen to these coaches because sometimes they actually kind of accidentally let something out. The way the Jets are going to utilize these three running backs has been kind of a mystery. And I think things can definitely change based on performances in training camp in the preseason. Isaiah Davis still has a shot, I think, to earn more touches. And Glenn has said that, they're going to use three running backs, but Glenn kind of may have actually given away how they're going to use these running back rotations. And it sounds like plan A right now might be to kind of use a Breece Hall, Braylon Allen combo. And the thing with the Jets running back room is that there's talent there. I mean, that's one of the few skill spots where I feel very optimistic about what the Jets are going to be running out there. And one of the things is Allen and Hall are both talented players. It never really felt last year like the Jets figured out the code for how to unlock the two of them. Because on paper, these guys complement each other's games quite well. Hall's kind of the lightning. Now, Hall's a bigger back, but Hall's more of a speed guy. He's more, I'm not sure I'd call him a finesse runner, but more of a finesse runner than Allen. Whereas Allen's a guy who profiles as a really tough physical runner between the tackles. And on paper, these guys should work great together. But last year, it never really happened. Breece got off to a really slow start the first 5 weeks or so of the season. Allen looked like a number one back. And then after that, Allen's production kind of fell off and Breece started to play better. So I think to maximize these two guys, you're going to want to find the right mix between the two of them. And that's partially finding the right amount of carries each of them get, but also using them in a smart way. Using them back to back. If Allen pounds a run up the middle, maybe use Breece on an outside run, or if Breece, exposes the edges by breaking a 15, 20-yard run down the right end, next play use Allen the hammer. There were lots of issues with the Jets offense last year, lots of things that coaching staff can be criticized for. But one of the things that kind of fell under the radar was they never really figured out how to get Breece Hall and Braylon Allen to complement each other, which is something that should not have been that hard because of the respective skill sets these guys bring to the table. And we know the Jets are going to run the ball a lot this year with Justin Fields at quarterback. And Fields is the type of guy who could make these running backs even better because on any given play where Justin Fields is handing the ball off, he's also a threat to pull it back and run. So defenders are going to have to be a little careful about over pursuing the running backs because if Fields pulls the ball and runs, he's capable of breaking a big one. I think a youth movement's good in general for the reasons I mentioned. Younger players have more upside. They tend to be either in their prime or approaching their prime or ascending. They give you more of an opportunity to develop quality players when they're backups. But the running back position is especially critical. And this could be a very talented duo the Jets have in the backfield with Braylon Hall. Braylon Hall. Well, maybe that's what we'll call them. Maybe we'll call them Braylon Hall or Breece Allen. But Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, it could be quite a duo. And it sounds like Aaron Glenn has a plan for maximizing what they're going to be capable of doing. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, one of the Jets' best players gave a pretty detailed scouting report on two critical players. One's on the offensive side of the ball, one's on the defensive side of the ball, and the Jets need the skills that Quinton Williams says that these guys bring to the table. We'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I mean, if you're like me, I hate to admit it, you lose track of what streaming services you're subscribed to. Some of them aren't that useful. Monarch Money can help you with that, help you avoid the problems I have, and so much more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday. Let's turn our attention to a couple things Quinton Williams had to say during a media appearance this week on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams. He praised two of his teammates in particular. Now, of course, this time of year, players are praising their teammates. I mean, I think if you go across all 32 training camps, you have 32 teams that are convincing you, trying to convince you that they're Super Bowl contenders. But it's not so much the fact that Williams praised these two guys. It's more about what he praised them for. So one of the players Williams praised was Armand Membou, who, of course, the Jets drafted in the first round. He said, I've gone up against him already a couple times. He is strong. He is extremely strong, probably one of the strongest people on the team. And that's significant. Now, one of the things I always try and figure out in training camp is what's the generic talk praising somebody on your team and what's something worth considering. And usually when we're talking, when I figure out what's worth considering, I try and narrow down what's specific. You know, are you just saying this guy's good, or are you talking about one specific attribute a guy has? And in this case, Quinton Williams was talking about Membou's strength. He talked about how strong Membou is. And Quinton Williams is a guy who's been up against some of the best offensive linemen in the league. He's been up against some of the strongest offensive linemen in the league. So I think it's notable that the first thing that jumps off the page for Quinton Williams is Membou's strength. And the reason it's significant is we all talk about, well, we hope Membou's good this year. But good is a generic term. Of course, we want Membou to be a good pass protector. We want him to be mobile. We want him to be able to protect the edge one-on-one against elite edge rushers. But one of the most important things Membou is going to have to do this year is open holes in the run game, because the Jets are going to be a very, very run-oriented offense, as we discussed earlier, with the running backs they've had. And with the quarterback they've got, Justin Fields, who is still a work in progress as a passer, but one of the few genuine difference makers as a rusher at the quarterback position in this league. And you can't run the ball unless your offensive line blocks effectively. I think Aaron Glenn has pretty much said that he wants this to be a very, very physical football team. And I think that starts in the run game. And you're going to need the offensive lineman to be able to bulldoze people. Now, on the left side of the line, you have Olu Fashanu, who I really like, who I think is going to be a good player in this league. But everything about Fashanu's game suggests he's more of like your classic left tackle kind of guy who's going to be very good in pass protection, but maybe not a guy who you'd view as a road grader in the run game. You know, kind of more of a DeBrickashaw-Ferguson type. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, even if you want to have a very physical offensive line, you got a left tackle whose specialty is pass protection. You take that any day of the week. During DeBrickashaw's career, especially the early days, the Jets had a very physical offensive line. He just handled he handled dealing with the edge rushers on the blind side. It worked great for the Jets. But for that to work, you got to have somebody who can move people on the other side in the run game. And that's where Membou comes in. And look, I think this is not a huge surprise. I think there's a reason the Jets drafted him in the top 10, but it's still good to hear. It's good to hear a defensive lineman of Quinton Williams' caliber praise not just Membou, but that particular trait, because that particular trait is going to be critical for making this Jets offense work this season. And Williams was not done. On the Up and Adams show, he referred to Jamie Sherwood as baby CJ Mosley because he's taking leadership of the defense. Now, if you followed the Jets last year, you know Sherwood was one of the success stories. He entered last season really as a backup. He was kind of an afterthought. I think this time last year, Sherwood was entering the final year of his rookie deal. Day 3 pick out of Auburn in 2021. It developed into a decent backup, but I think a lot of us expected 2024 to be Sherwood's last season with the Jets. But CJ Mosley, as he aged, had health issues. He had trouble staying on the field last year, and these health issues eventually led him to retire. And Sherwood took over. And Sherwood had a phenomenal season. Sherwood ended up being voted the team MVP by his teammates. and then scoring a big contract from the Jets. And if the Jets had not paid him, some other team out there would have, because he had a big season. But it's not just about how you play. Part of Mosley's value to the Jets through the years was he was a very savvy guy, and he was the guy who understood Robert Saleh's defense inside and out. He was the guy that made sure that everybody got lined up correctly, and there was a lot of value to that. Mosley was an excellent run defender through much of his career, but a lot of his value, people around the Jets would tell you, was intangibles. Part of that was just being an overall locker room leader, but part of it was he was the guy that was viewed as the quarterback of the defense. And that was something, Sherwood, I think that was a role Sherwood handled well last year. I really think as good of a player as C.J. Mosley was through his career, the Jets did not miss a beat at the linebacker position. The Jets had issues on their defense last year, but I don't think it was really about replacing Mosley with Sherwood. I just think the defensive line was not good. I think the Jets had good linebacker play last year between Sherwood and Mosley. When they had issues getting beat up in the run game, it was because nobody could hold the point of attack on the defensive line. But of course, a new defense coming in, Aaron Glenn implementing his system along with Steve Wilkes, the new defensive coordinator. And it's going to be important to have a guy on the field who really understands the system inside and out. And this is probably going to be a bit of a more complex system than Robert Saleh ran. And that quarterback of the defense, he's got to be up to speed faster than anybody else. He's got to be the guy that understands, even if it's his first year, he's got to understand the defense at a higher level. Sherwood, I would imagine, will be the guy who's designated as kind of the leader of the defense. And now, if you're not familiar with this, there's one player on offense and one player on defense who actually have a radio in their helmet and get the play call from the coaching staff. On offense, the guy's always the quarterback. On defense, it's typically the middle linebacker. And I think that's probably the role Sherwood will take this year, to be the guy to relay the call. But he's got to know these calls at a super high level, because you don't want to see breakdowns on the defensive side of the ball. And that's always a danger your first year. So again, specifics are what matter. It's easy to say, oh, Sherwood's great. But he's talking about Sherwood's mastery of the defense, the ownership Sherwood's taking. He's kind of like moving into that C.J. Mosley role. And that's one of the things probably really helped Sherwood during the early years of his career, was having C.J. Mosley around the team, kind of showing him how important it is for a middle linebacker to lead and how to lead. And, it's really good for the Jets to hear the guy they just gave a big contract to is embracing a new leadership role. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.